The morning light poured through the windows of Sunshine Café, catching the small specks of dust that danced in the air. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade pie filled the cozy space that had become a second home to many locals in the small town of Riverdale. For Melissa Brooks, this place had been her workplace for the past 3 years, and she knew every regular customer by name and order. At 32, Melissa wasn't where she had imagined herself to be. Life had thrown her some curveballs, but she faced each day with a smile that reached her eyes. Her dark hair was always neatly tied back, and her uniform, though well-worn, was spotless. The other servers often wondered how she managed to keep her apron clean even during the busiest shifts. "Order up for table 7, called out Lou, the cook who had been working at the cafe longer than anyone could remember. His booming voice carried over the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation. Melissa grabbed the plates of steaming food and navigated between the tables with practiced ease. The morning rush was always hectic, but she thrived in the busy atmosphere. Regular customers would wave as she passed, and she would respond with a quick smile or a nod, never breaking her stride. By early afternoon, the cafe had settled into its usual lull. A few customers lingered over coffee, and Melissa took the opportunity to refill ketchup bottles and salt shakers. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a new arrival. An elderly man stood in the doorway, slightly hunched, his weathered face partially hidden by the brim of a faded cap. The words "Korean War Veteran" were stitched across the front, though the thread had begun to fray at the edges. He shuffled toward his usual spot by the window, moving slowly as if each step required careful thought. "Afternoon, Mr. Wilson," Melissa called out, already reaching for a menu, though she knew he wouldn't need it. "Afternoon," he replied, his voice rough but gentle. His eyes, pale blue and clouded with age, crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her. Frank Wilson had been coming to the cafe every Tuesday and Thursday for as long as Melissa had worked there. He always ordered the same thing, a cup of black coffee and the meatloaf special. He rarely spoke much, but there was a quiet dignity about him that Melissa had always respected. As she approached his table, she noticed something different about him today. His clothes, usually neat though simple, seemed more worn than usual. His hands, spotted with age and marked by years of hard work, trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. "Just coffee today, please," he said, not meeting her eyes. Melissa nodded and returned moments later with a steaming cup. "Are you sure you don't want your usual, Mr. Wilson? Lou just made a fresh batch of meatloaf." The old veteran hesitated, then slowly emptied his pocket onto the table. A small pile of coins clattered against the surface. Quarters, dimes, and pennies that he began to count with deliberate care. "Just seeing what I've got today," he mumbled, his fingers struggling to stack the coins neatly. Melissa pretended to wipe nearby tables, giving him privacy while keeping an eye on him. She saw him count the money once, twice, and then a third time, his expression falling slightly each time. The total came to just under $5, enough for coffee but not much else. A tightness formed in Melissa's chest. She had noticed Mr. Wilson had been losing weight over the past few months. His wedding ring, which he still wore 15 years after his wife's passing, hung loose on his finger. She made a quick decision and headed back to the kitchen. "Lou, can I get a meatloaf special?" she called out, pulling her wallet from her back pocket. The cook raised an eyebrow but nodded, already reaching for a plate. "Table 7 again?" "No, it's for Mr. Wilson." Lou glanced through the small window that looked out onto the dining area. His expression softened when he spotted the elderly man sitting alone. "He's short again?" Melissa nodded, counting out bills from her tip money. "Don't tell anyone, okay?" "I'll cover it," Lou waved her money away. "Put that back. Just this once, it's on me. But don't let Reynolds see." He nodded toward the office where their manager worked. "Thanks, Lou," Melissa said, genuine gratitude in her voice. When the food was ready, she carried the plate to Mr. Wilson's table, setting it down with a flourish. "Special of the day on the house," she said brightly. The old veteran looked up, confusion written across his face. "I didn't order this." "I can't. It's a new promotion we're doing," Melissa improvised smoothly. "Every 100 customers gets a free meal. And would you believe it? You're our 100th customer today." It was a transparent lie, and they both knew it. But sometimes pride needed a little room to breathe, especially for a man who had given so much for his country. Mr. Wilson's eyes grew misty, though he tried to hide it by adjusting his cap. Well, I wouldn't want to turn down a promotion, he said finally, picking up his fork. Melissa squeezed his shoulder gently before moving on to her other tables, giving him the dignity of enjoying his meal without an audience. What she didn't notice was Reynolds, the cafe manager, watching the exchange from the doorway of his office, a deep frown etched on his face. As the afternoon wore on, more customers filtered in and out of the cafe. A young mother with twins who left more food on the floor than in their mouths. A group of high school students who stayed for an hour and ordered only 2 baskets of fries to share. Business people who barely looked up from their phones to place their orders. Through it all, Melissa moved with tireless energy, refilling drinks before they were empty, remembering who wanted extra napkins, who needed their coffee kept scalding hot, and who preferred their sandwiches cut diagonally instead of down the middle. Mr. Wilson took his time with his meal, savoring each bite as if it might be his last good meal for a while. When he finally finished, he pulled himself to his feet with the help of a worn wooden cane. "Thank you," he said quietly as he passed Melissa on his way to the door. The words were simple, but his eyes conveyed much more. Gratitude, yes, but also a touch of shame that he needed help in the first place. "See you Thursday, Mr. Wilson," she replied warmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. He nodded, adjusted his veteran's cap, and made his slow way out into the afternoon sun. Later, as Melissa was clearing tables before the dinner rush, Reynolds appeared at her side. He was younger than most of the staff he managed, with slicked back hair and a perpetual look of someone who had just smelled something unpleasant. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "My office after your shift." A cold knot formed in Melissa's stomach, but she nodded and continued working. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of orders and payments, her mind constantly returning to that brief interaction and what it might mean. When the last customer of her shift had left and the next server had taken over her section, Melissa removed her apron and headed toward the manager's office. The small room was cluttered with papers and restaurant supply catalogs. Reynolds sat behind the desk, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Melissa perched on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I saw what you did today," Reynolds began without preamble, "giving away food to that old man." "I paid for it myself," Melissa said quickly. "Well, Lou helped, but no money came out of the register, I promise." Reynolds shook his head. "That's not the point. We have policies about this sort of thing. Corporate has been clear. No handouts, no freebies, no exceptions." "It wasn't a handout," Melissa protested. "Mr. Wilson is a regular customer. He's a veteran who served our country. He was just having a rough day." "Rules are rules," Reynolds replied, unmoved. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end? Next thing you know, everyone will claim they're just having a rough day and expect free food." Melissa felt heat rising to her face. "It was one meal and it didn't cost the cafe anything." "It's about setting precedents," Reynolds insisted. "Besides, corporate has been pushing us to cut costs. They're sending someone to review our operations next week." He straightened a stack of papers on his desk, avoiding her eyes. "I can't have my staff undermining policies right before an inspection. So what are you saying?" Melissa asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm saying I have to let you go." The words hung in the air between them. Melissa felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. "You're firing me? For feeding an elderly veteran?" Reynolds had the decency to look uncomfortable, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'm firing you for violating company policy. I need your apron and name tag before you leave." Melissa stood up slowly, her legs feeling oddly numb. She unpinned her name tag and placed it on the desk with deliberate care. "You know," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "My grandfather was a veteran too. He always said you can tell a lot about people by how they treat those who can't do anything for them in return." She untied her apron and laid it next to her name tag. "I wonder what that says about this place." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the office, head held high despite the tears threatening to spill over. As she passed through the kitchen, Lou looked up from the grill, questions in his eyes. She shook her head slightly, not trusting herself to speak. Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm on her face, a stark contrast to the cold knot of worry forming in her stomach. 3 years of steady work gone in an instant. Rent was due next week, and her car needed repairs she'd been putting off. But as she walked to the bus stop, Melissa couldn't bring herself to regret what she'd done. Some things were more important than rules on a corporate handbook. Some people deserved kindness even when it came at a cost. What she didn't know, as she boarded the bus that would take her home, was that her simple act of compassion had been witnessed by more people than just her disapproving manager. And in less than 24 hours, those witnesses would set in motion events that would change everything. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Melissa's mood perfectly as she sat at her small kitchen table. Her apartment was modest but cozy, decorated with second-hand furniture and small touches that made it uniquely hers. A patchwork quilt her grandmother had made, photographs of places she hoped to visit someday, potted plants that somehow thrived despite her inconsistent care. She stared at the newspaper spread out before her, open to the classified section. Red circles already marked several possibilities, though none seemed promising. After 3 years at the cafe, starting over somewhere new felt daunting. More than the job itself, she would miss the regulars, the morning crowd who knew just how to make her laugh, the elderly couple who came every Sunday after church, and, of course, Mr. Wilson with his quiet dignity. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Diane, another server from the cafe. Everyone's talking about what happened. Lou is furious. Call me when you can. Melissa sighed and set the phone down without responding. She wasn't ready to rehash everything just yet. Instead, she pulled on a raincoat and headed out, needing to clear her head. The town of Riverdale wasn't large, just under 30,000 people, but it had a close-knit feel that Melissa had grown to love since moving there 5 years ago. Main Street was lined with small businesses, a bookstore that hosted local author readings, a hardware store where the owner knew everyone by name, and several family-owned restaurants that had been there for generations before Sunshine Café had moved in as part of a growing chain. Almost without meaning to, her feet carried her toward the cafe. She stopped across the street, watching through the rain as customers came and went. Through the window, she could see Diane rushing between tables, looking more frazzled than usual. Tuesday lunch rushes were always busy, and they were clearly short-staffed without Melissa there. A pang of something, not quite regret but close, hit her as she turned away. She pulled her hood up against the increasingly heavy rain and hurried down the sidewalk, not noticing the elderly man with a cane until she nearly collided with him. "I'm so sorry," she began, then recognized the faded veteran's cap. "Mr. Wilson." Frank Wilson looked up, surprise and then recognition crossing his weathered face. "Melissa," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I just came from the cafe. They told me what happened." Melissa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's not a big deal. I'll find something else." The old veteran shook his head, drops of rain falling from the brim of his cap. "It is a big deal. You lost your job because of me." "Because of a stupid policy," Melissa corrected gently. "Not because of you." Mr. Wilson shifted his weight, leaning more heavily on his cane. "I never meant to cause trouble. If I'd known, then I wouldn't have told you," Melissa said with a small smile. "Look, we're both getting soaked. There's a coffee shop around the corner. Let me buy you a cup, no strings attached this time." The veteran hesitated, then nodded. Together, they walked slowly to the small, independently owned coffee shop that had somehow survived, despite competition from bigger chains. The warm air inside fogged Melissa's glasses as they entered, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods enveloping them. Once seated with steaming mugs before them, Mr. Wilson studied her face. "My grandson called this morning," he said after a moment. "He checks in on me every few days." Melissa nodded, unsure where this was going. "I told him what you did, and what happened because of it." The old man's hands, spotted with age and marked by decades of hard work, wrapped around his mug. "He didn't take it well. Your grandson? Gregory. He's a Marine, stationed about 40 miles from here." Pride crept into Mr. Wilson's voice. "Third-generation military in our family. You must be very proud," Melissa said. "I am. Boy's got a good head on his shoulders and a strong sense of right and wrong." He took a careful sip of his coffee. "Takes after his grandmother that way." For the next hour, they sat together as the rain drummed against the windows. Mr. Wilson spoke more than Melissa had ever heard him speak before. He told her about his late wife, Beth, who had been the love of his life for over 50 years, about his time in Korea during the war, though he skipped over the worst parts, focusing instead on the friends he had made and the places he had seen, about the construction company he had built from nothing after coming home, and how he had sold it when his hands became too arthritic to work effectively. But enough about an old man's memories, he said finally. What will you do now? Melissa shrugged, tracing the rim of her now empty mug. Apply for other jobs, I guess. There's a diner over on 5th Street that might be hiring. You're good at what you do, Mr. Wilson said. People notice that kind of thing. Thanks, Melissa replied, genuinely touched by his confidence in her. I should probably start dropping off applications this afternoon. They parted ways outside the coffee shop, the rain having lightened to a gentle mist. Mr. Wilson insisted on paying for their coffee, saying with a twinkle in his eye that he'd brought enough money this time. Melissa let him, understanding that sometimes allowing someone their dignity was worth more than a few dollars. As she turned to leave, Mr. Wilson called after her. Melissa, what you did, it meant something. More than you know. She smiled and waved, not trusting herself to speak without her voice cracking. The rest of the day passed in a blur of applications and polite rejections. We're not hiring right now, or we'll keep your application on file, or worst of all, do you have experience in something besides food service? By evening, Melissa was exhausted and disheartened. She stopped at the grocery store to pick up something simple for dinner, mentally calculating how long her savings would last if she didn't find work soon. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the person approaching until a hand touched her shoulder. Melissa, I thought that was you. She turned to find Lou, the cook from Sunshine Café, standing there with a shopping basket over his arm. Lou, how are you? The big man shook his head, his usually cheerful face set in a scowl. Angry, that's how I am. Reynolds is a fool, and I told him so to his face. Melissa winced. You didn't get yourself in trouble too, did you? Ha, he needs me more than I need that job. Besides, he knows I'm right. Lou lowered his voice. The regulars are asking about you. Word's getting around about what happened. Great, Melissa sighed. Just what I need, to be the talk of the town. It's not like that, Lou insisted. People are on your side. Reynolds got 3 complaint calls today from customers who said they won't be back if he doesn't make this right. Melissa felt a complicated mix of emotions. Gratitude for the support, embarrassment at being the center of attention, and a small, petty part of her that was pleased Reynolds was facing consequences. How's Mr. Wilson? She asked, changing the subject. I ran into him earlier today, but I was wondering if he came in for dinner. Lou's expression darkened. No, and that's another thing. His usual table sat empty all evening. Reynolds kept glancing at it, looking more nervous as time went on. They chatted a few minutes more before parting ways, Lou squeezing her shoulder and telling her to keep her chin up. As she walked home, Melissa couldn't help wondering if she'd ever work at the cafe again. Despite everything, part of her missed it already. The next morning, her phone rang early, startling her awake. The number wasn't one she recognized. Hello? She answered groggily. Is this Melissa Brooks? A woman's voice asked. Yes, that's me. This is Patricia from Homestead Restaurant on Maple Street. You dropped off an application yesterday. Melissa sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. Yes, I did. We'd like you to come in for an interview today if possible. Say around 11? That would be perfect, Melissa replied, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. Thank you so much. After hanging up, she allowed herself a small victory dance around her bedroom. Homestead Restaurant was a well-established local place with a good reputation. She'd heard they treated their staff well, and the tips were supposed to be excellent. The interview went better than she could have hoped. Patricia, the owner, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who asked direct questions and seemed pleased with Melissa's answers. By the end of the hour, Melissa had been offered a job starting the following Monday. We've been short-staffed for weeks, Patricia explained, as she showed Melissa around the restaurant. When you came in yesterday with your experience and references, it seemed like perfect timing. Thank you for the opportunity, Melissa said sincerely. I won't let you down. I know you won't, and by the way, Patricia added with a knowing look, I've heard about what happened at Sunshine. Anyone who'd put kindness before policy is welcome on my staff. Melissa felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she left the restaurant with a new uniform in hand. Maybe things were looking up after all. She decided to treat herself to lunch to celebrate, stopping at a small taco stand that had recently opened. As she waited for her order, her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "You won't believe what happened today. Call me ASAP." Curious despite herself, Melissa found a quiet bench in a nearby park and called her former co-worker. "Melissa, oh my God, you missed it." Diane's voice came through, pitched higher than usual with excitement. "Missed what?" "The Marines. They came to the cafe." Melissa nearly dropped her phone. "Marines? What are you talking about?" "4 of them in full uniform. They came in during the lunch rush when the place was packed." Diane's words tumbled out in a rush. "They asked to speak to Reynolds, and when he came out from the office, they were so, I don't know, official? Intimidating but polite at the same time." "What did they want?" Melissa asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "They said they were there about Mr. Wilson and how he was treated, and about you being fired." Diane lowered her voice, though there was no one around to hear her through the phone. "One of them, the one who seemed to be in charge, said he was Mr. Wilson's grandson." Gregory, Melissa thought. The Marine Mr. Wilson had mentioned. What happened then? She pressed when Diane paused for breath. Reynolds tried to talk about company policy, but they weren't having it. The grandson said his grandfather is a decorated war hero who saved 3 men in his unit during the Korean War. He said the old man would never ask for special treatment, but that doesn't mean he doesn't deserve respect. Melissa felt tears prick at her eyes. In all their conversations, Mr. Wilson had never mentioned being a hero. The whole cafe went quiet, Diane continued. You could have heard a pin drop. People were recording it on their phones. I bet it's all over social media by now. And then what? Then they left, all dignified and everything. But the damage was done. Reynolds looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him up. Diane sounded almost gleeful. Corporate called him right after. I don't know what they said, but he's been locked in his office ever since. Melissa didn't know how to feel. Part of her was touched that Mr. Wilson's grandson had stood up for her, but another part felt uncomfortable with the public spectacle of it all. There's more, Diane added. People are talking about boycotting the cafe. The regulars are saying they'll go elsewhere until Reynolds makes this right. After hanging up, Melissa sat on the bench for a long time, her lunch forgotten beside her. She had never wanted to cause such a fuss. All she had done was try to help an elderly veteran keep his dignity. How had everything spiraled so far out of control? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Melissa finally stood up. Whatever happened next, she had a new job starting Monday. Life would go on. What she didn't know was that the 4 Marines were not finished yet. Their visit to Sunshine Café had only been the beginning. News travels fast in small towns. By Thursday morning, nearly everyone in Riverdale had heard about the Marines' visit to Sunshine Café. Versions of the story varied. Some said the Marines had threatened to shut the place down. Others claimed they'd stood on tables and given speeches about patriotism. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. But one fact remained consistent in every retelling. Melissa Brooks had been fired for showing kindness to a veteran, and people weren't happy about it. Melissa tried to keep a low profile, spending most of her time at home preparing for her new job that would start on Monday. She organized her closet, deep-cleaned her apartment, and caught up on the small tasks she'd been putting off for weeks. Anything to keep her mind occupied and away from the swirl of attention surrounding her name. Her phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from friends, former customers, and even a few strangers who had somehow gotten her number. Most expressed support. A few offered other job opportunities, and one particularly enthusiastic caller wanted to start a petition to get Reynolds fired. Melissa thanked them all politely but declined any further action. She had a new job lined up and just wanted the whole situation to blow over. Around noon, a knock at her door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and few people knew where she lived. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole to see a young man in a crisp Marine uniform standing in the hallway, his posture straight as an arrow, hat tucked under his arm. Melissa hesitated, then opened the door. "Melissa Brooks?" the young Marine asked, his voice carrying the same gravelly undertone as Mr. Wilson's. Though much younger, yes, she replied, suddenly self-conscious of her old jeans and faded t-shirt. "Staff Sergeant Gregory Wilson, ma'am. I'm Frank Wilson's grandson." He stood at parade rest, formal but not unfriendly. "I was hoping I might have a word with you if you have the time." Up close, the family resemblance was clear. The same strong jawline, the same steadfast blue eyes, though Gregory's weren't yet marked by the decades of life experience that had shaped his grandfather's gaze. Of course, Melissa said, stepping back to allow him inside. Would you like some coffee? Or water? Water would be fine, thank you. As she moved to the kitchen, Gregory remained standing, taking in the small apartment with a respectful gaze. Please sit down, Melissa called over her shoulder. Make yourself comfortable. When she returned with 2 glasses of water, Gregory had seated himself on the edge of her couch, back straight, looking somewhat out of place among her colorful throw pillows. Thank you for seeing me without notice, he began after taking a sip. I wanted to apologize if our actions yesterday caused you any additional trouble. Your actions? Melissa raised an eyebrow. You mean the cafe visit that the whole town is talking about? A hint of color touched Gregory's cheeks. We didn't intend for it to become such a public spectacle. My friends and I just wanted to speak with the manager directly. 4 Marines in uniform tend to attract attention, Melissa pointed out, though without accusation. She was curious more than anything. Your grandfather told me you were stationed nearby, but he didn't mention you'd be visiting so soon. It wasn't planned. I was already scheduled for a few days of leave when he called and told me what happened. Gregory set his glass down carefully on a coaster. When he explained how you'd been fired for helping him, and how embarrassed he felt about the whole situation, well, I couldn't just do nothing. Melissa leaned back in her chair, studying the young Marine. He couldn't be older than 25, but there was a maturity in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years. So you rounded up 3 friends and staged an intervention? Something like that, Gregory admitted with a small smile. The others serve with me, Ryan, David, and Pete. They've met my grandfather at various family events over the years. When I told them what happened, they insisted on coming along. That was thoughtful, I suppose, Melissa said, but unnecessary. I've already found a new job, I heard. Homestead Restaurant is a good place. My grandfather and I used to go there sometimes before I enlisted. Gregory leaned forward slightly. But that's not why I'm here. Oh? The man who fired you, Reynolds. He's been calling my grandfather since yesterday afternoon, leaving messages asking to meet. Apparently, corporate isn't happy about the situation. Melissa wasn't surprised. Sunshine Café was part of a regional chain that prided itself on its community-friendly image. Having Marines publicly calling them out for mistreating a veteran was exactly the kind of publicity they would hate. What does your grandfather want to do? She asked. That's just it, he doesn't want to do anything. He feels responsible for you losing your job, and he's embarrassed by all the attention. Gregory ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. He keeps saying he's just an old man who should have stayed home that day. The thought of Mr. Wilson blaming himself made Melissa's heart ache. None of this is his fault. The policy was wrong, not him needing a meal. That's what I told him, Gregory agreed. But he's stubborn. Gets an idea in his head and it's hard to shake it loose. The corner of his mouth twitched. Family trait, I'm afraid. So I've noticed, Melissa said dryly, giving him a pointed look. Gregory acknowledged this with a small nod. Fair enough, but I need to ask you something and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. Okay. If Sunshine Café offered you your job back, would you take it? The question caught Melissa off guard. She hadn't considered the possibility. After the public embarrassment of being fired and the relief of finding a new position so quickly, the idea of returning to Sunshine felt strange. I don't know, she admitted. Why do you ask? Because they're going to offer. Reynolds called again this morning while I was with Grandpa. He wants to meet with both of you to apologize and offer you your position back with a raise. Melissa sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. And what does your grandfather think about this? He thinks you should do whatever makes you happy. Gregory smiled. His words, not mine. But he also said he'd feel better knowing you weren't suffering because of him. I'm not suffering, Melissa insisted. Really, I'm fine. I can see that, Gregory acknowledged. But would you at least consider meeting with Reynolds? If not for yourself, then for my grandfather's peace of mind. Put that way, how could she refuse? When and where? Tomorrow afternoon at my grandfather's house. Reynolds suggested the cafe, but I thought neutral ground would be better. After Gregory left, Melissa sat for a long time thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a server with a steady job and a quiet life. Now she was at the center of a small-town controversy involving Marines, corporate policy, and a public relations crisis. The next day dawned bright and clear, a welcome change after days of rain. Melissa dressed carefully in slacks and a blouse she usually reserved for job interviews. wanting to look professional for whatever awaited her at Mr. Wilson's house. The address Gregory had given her led to a modest one-story home on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. The yard was neat but simple, with a small garden of hardy perennials that could withstand a veteran's sometimes inconsistent care. Gregory answered her knock, once again in uniform. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping back to let her in. "Reynolds just arrived a few minutes ago." The living room was a snapshot of another era, furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than style, walls lined with photographs spanning decades, and a glass cabinet displaying military medals alongside children's handmade gifts. Mr. Wilson sat in a well-worn armchair, while Reynolds perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. Reynolds jumped to his feet when Melissa entered. He looked different somehow. Smaller outside the cafe, his usual confidence diminished. His normally slicked-back hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it nervously. "Melissa, thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Hello, Reynolds," she replied coolly before turning to Mr. Wilson with a warmer smile. "Mr. Wilson, it's good to see you again." The elderly veteran nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Likewise. Please have a seat." Gregory remained standing, positioning himself near his grandfather's chair like a sentinel. The message was clear. He was there to protect the old man's interests if needed. "I'll get straight to the point," Reynolds began once Melissa was seated. "I made a mistake. Corporate agrees that the policy was applied too rigidly in this situation, and they've authorized me to offer you your job back, effective immediately, with a 10% raise and no loss of seniority." Melissa kept her expression neutral. "And what about the policy itself? Will that change?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "We're implementing a new community support initiative that will allow staff more flexibility in certain situations, particularly involving veterans and active military personnel." Gregory made a small noise that might have been approval or skepticism. It was hard to tell. "That sounds like progress," Melissa said carefully. "But I've already accepted another position at Homestead Restaurant. I start on Monday. We'd be willing to offer an additional signing bonus if you reconsider," Reynolds pressed. "Corporate feels strongly about resolving this situation positively." "I'm sure they do," Melissa replied, unable to keep a hint of dryness from her tone. She glanced at Mr. Wilson, who was watching the exchange with quiet attentiveness. "What do you think about all this, Mr. Wilson?" The old veteran seemed surprised to be asked his opinion. "Me? Well, I think it's good they're reconsidering that policy. Might help other folks down the line." "It will," Reynolds assured him quickly. "We're actually planning to extend the initiative to include all of our locations. Your situation has prompted a company-wide review." Mr. Wilson nodded slowly, considering this. "Sometimes it takes a pebble to start an avalanche," he mused. "Though I never thought I'd be the pebble. Or me," Melissa added with a small smile. "So will you consider our offer?" Reynolds asked, returning to the main point. Melissa took a deep breath. "I appreciate the gesture, Reynolds. And the raise. But I think I'll stick with Homestead. It feels like the right move for me right now." Reynolds looked disappointed but not surprised. "I understand. The offer remains open if you change your mind." After Reynolds left, a palpable relief settled over the room. Gregory's posture relaxed slightly, and Mr. Wilson seemed to sink deeper into his chair, as if a weight had been lifted. "You didn't have to do that on my account," the old veteran said. "If you wanted your job back, you should have taken it." "I didn't do it for you," Melissa assured him, "though I am glad it eased your mind. I did it for me. Sometimes life gives you a push in a new direction just when you need it." Gregory smiled at this. "My grandmother used to say something similar. That sometimes what looks like a stumbling block turns out to be a stepping stone." "Smart woman," Melissa said. "The smartest," Mr. Wilson agreed, his eyes drifting to a photograph on the wall showing a pretty woman with a gentle smile. "She would have liked you, Melissa." The three of them sat talking for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. As Melissa prepared to leave, Gregory walked her to the door. "Thank you again," he said, "for everything you did for my grandfather and for coming today." "No need to thank me," Melissa replied. "Though I am curious, what would you and your Marine friends have done if Reynolds hadn't offered to make things right?" Gregory's expression remained neutral, but a glint of mischief showed in his eyes. Let's just say we had a plan B and C if necessary. Melissa laughed. I almost wish I could have seen that. Well, Gregory said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, you might still get your chance. My friends and I aren't done yet. What do you mean? We've been talking. About my grandfather, about veterans like him in this community, about how many of them might be in the same boat, too proud to ask for help but struggling all the same. Gregory straightened slightly. We think there's more to be done here, and we'd like your help if you're willing. Melissa studied him, intrigued despite herself. What kind of help? Come to the cafe tomorrow at noon. We'll show you. As she walked home in the fading afternoon light, Melissa wondered what the Marines could possibly have planned. Whatever it was, she had a feeling Riverdale hadn't seen the last of this story. Not by a long shot. Melissa arrived at Sunshine Café 5 minutes before noon the next day, her curiosity overcoming her initial reluctance to return to the place where she'd been fired. The lunch rush was in full swing, every table filled with customers whose conversations created a pleasant hum throughout the space. She noticed several familiar faces, regulars who had been coming in for years, some of whom waved or nodded in recognition. Diane spotted her from across the room and hurried over, coffee pot still in hand. You came, she exclaimed, giving Melissa an awkward one-armed hug. I wasn't sure you would after turning down Reynolds' offer. How did you know about that? Melissa asked, though she wasn't really surprised. Word traveled fast in Riverdale. Please, Diane rolled her eyes. Reynolds has been moping around all morning, muttering about ungrateful employees and trying to do the right thing. It wasn't hard to figure out. She glanced at the clock above the door. Are you here for the Marines? They reserved the big corner table. Before Melissa could answer, the door swung open and Gregory Wilson walked in, followed by 3 other men in Marine uniforms. Unlike their previous visit, when they had arrived with stern faces and official postures, today they were smiling and greeting people as they made their way through the cafe. Behind them came Mr. Wilson, moving slowly with his cane, but looking more energetic than Melissa had seen him in months. And behind him, to Melissa's surprise, came a stream of other elderly men and women, at least a dozen of them, many wearing caps or pins identifying them as veterans. Gregory spotted Melissa and waved her over to the large corner table, which had been extended with several smaller tables pushed together to create one long surface. Glad you could make it, he said, pulling out a chair for her. We wanted you to be part of this from the beginning. Part of what exactly? Melissa asked, taking the offered seat. Before Gregory could answer, Reynolds emerged from the back office, eyes widening at the sight of so many people filing in. He approached cautiously, looking from the Marines to the elderly veterans to Melissa. Are you all here for lunch? He asked, a note of concern in his voice. We are, Gregory confirmed, and we'd like to speak with you afterward if you have a few minutes. Reynolds nodded, visibly relieved that this didn't appear to be another confrontation. Of course. I'll have the staff take care of you right away. As Reynolds hurried off to arrange service for the large group, Melissa leaned toward Gregory. What's going on? You'll see, he replied with a small smile. Just watch. The next hour passed in a flurry of food, conversation, and laughter. The 4 Marines spread themselves throughout the table, each sitting with different veterans, engaging them in conversation and listening intently to their stories. Melissa found herself seated between Mr. Wilson and an elderly woman named Betty, who had served as a nurse during Vietnam. Frank tells me you're the one who stood up for him, Betty said, her eyes bright and alert despite her advanced age. Not many would risk their job that way these days. I didn't think of it as a risk at the time, Melissa admitted. It just seemed like the right thing to do. The right thing often comes with a price, Betty nodded sagely. That's how you know it matters. As coffee and dessert were being served, Gregory stood up, tapping his spoon against his water glass to get everyone's attention. The cafe had quieted somewhat as the regular lunch crowd thinned, making it easier for his voice to carry. I want to thank everyone for coming today, he began, looking around the table at the assembled veterans. Some of you I've known my whole life, others I've just had the pleasure of meeting. But you all share something important. You served our country when it needed you most. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the cafe, not just from those at the table but from other customers as well. My grandfather, Gregory continued, placing a hand on Mr. Wilson's shoulder, taught me that service doesn't end when you hang up the uniform. It's a lifetime commitment to your community and to each other. He paused, looking directly at Reynolds, who stood near the counter. Recently, my grandfather had an experience here that highlighted something many veterans face: pride that makes it hard to ask for help, even when that help is needed. Reynolds had the grace to look uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. But something good has come from that situation, Gregory continued. It's brought us together today to start something new. He gestured to his fellow Marines. My friends and I have been stationed nearby for 2 years, and we've seen how many veterans in this community sometimes struggle quietly. So we're launching a new program called Meals with Honor. Melissa glanced at Mr. Wilson, who was watching his grandson with unmistakable pride shining in his eyes. The concept is simple, Gregory explained. Local restaurants partner with us to provide meals to veterans in need. No questions asked, no embarrassment, just respect and good food. We've already spoken with several restaurant owners in town who are eager to participate. He turned to Reynolds. We'd like Sunshine Café to be our first official partner. We understand you've already revised your policy regarding community support, and we believe this program would align perfectly with your new initiative. Reynolds looked momentarily stunned, clearly not having expected this turn of events. We would need to discuss the details, of course, but speaking personally, I think it's an excellent idea. He glanced at Melissa, then back to Gregory. Sometimes it takes a hard lesson to help us see more clearly. We've prepared some information, one of the other Marines said, standing up and handing Reynolds a folder. Cost projections, participation guidelines, everything you'd need to present to your corporate office. Thank you, Reynolds replied, looking genuinely impressed as he flipped through the papers. This is very thorough. Marines don't do anything halfway. Sir, the young man replied with a smile. As the meeting continued, with details being discussed and questions answered, Melissa found herself watching the interactions with a sense of wonder. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, covering a meal for an elderly veteran, had somehow blossomed into something much larger, something that might help dozens or even hundreds of people. Did you know about this? She asked Mr. Wilson quietly. The old veteran nodded. Gregory mentioned the idea when he first came home on leave, but I never thought it would happen so fast, or that my situation would be the spark that lit the fire. Your grandson is quite remarkable, Melissa observed. He is, Mr. Wilson agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Reminds me of his grandmother, always thinking of others, always finding a way to make things better. After the meeting concluded, with Reynolds promising to present the proposal to corporate immediately, people began to disperse. The veterans thanked the Marines, shook hands with Reynolds, and slowly made their way out, many stopping to speak briefly with Melissa on their way. You're something of a hero to them now, Gregory told her as the cafe emptied. The server who stood up for one of their own, Melissa shook her head. I'm no hero. I just did what anyone would do. But that's just it. Not everyone would do what you did, Gregory insisted. Most people would have looked the other way, followed the rules, protected their job. You didn't, and that matters. As they stood to leave, Reynolds approached Melissa, looking uncharacteristically humble. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not the corporate version I gave yesterday. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Melissa studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, I think partnering with this program is a great step forward. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as Melissa, Gregory, and Mr. Wilson stood together on the sidewalk. What happens now? Melissa asked. Now we expand, Gregory replied. Talk to more restaurants, reach more veterans. Pete, one of my friends, his father owns a printing company. He's donating cards that veterans can present at participating restaurants. And you're doing all this while on active duty? Gregory shrugged. We're stationed here for at least another year. Plenty of time to get the program established. After that, hopefully, it will run itself with community support. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat. There's one more thing we'd like to discuss with you, Melissa. A request, actually. Oh? We need someone local to help coordinate, Gregory explained. Someone who knows the restaurant business, who understands the community, and who has already proven they care about veterans. Melissa blinked in surprise. You mean me? But I just started a new job. I don't have experience with something like this. It wouldn't be full-time, Mr. Wilson assured her. Just a few hours a week, helping with the restaurant relationships, being a point of contact for veterans who might be hesitant to participate. And Patricia at Homestead is already on board with the program, Gregory added. She said she'd be happy to work around any schedule conflicts if you decided to help us. Melissa hesitated, touched by their confidence in her but uncertain if she could take on the responsibility. Can I think about it? Of course, Gregory nodded. Take all the time you need. As they parted ways, Melissa walked slowly through the town she'd called home for 5 years, seeing it with new eyes. The hardware store where Mr. Wilson probably bought supplies for his small garden, the pharmacy where he filled prescriptions, the barber shop where he might get his hair cut. All places where an elderly veteran might interact with his community, all places where he might be seen or overlooked. By the time she reached her apartment, Melissa had made her decision. She pulled out her phone and dialed Gregory's number. "I'm in," she said when he answered. "Tell me what you need me to do." Gregory's smile was audible in his voice. "I hoped you'd say that. How about we meet tomorrow to go over the details? My grandfather suggested dinner at his house." "Sounds perfect," Melissa replied. As she ended the call, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in a long time. What had begun as one small act of kindness was growing into something that might change many lives, including her own. Sometimes, she reflected, the smallest pebble could indeed start an avalanche. And sometimes being fired was just the beginning of a much bigger story. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and trees aflame with red and gold leaves. For Melissa, it had been the most purposeful season of her life. Monday through Friday, she worked at Homestead Restaurant, where she had quickly become a customer favorite. Her natural warmth and efficiency made her invaluable to Patricia, who had already promoted her to shift supervisor. Weekday evenings and Saturday mornings were dedicated to the Meals with Honor program, which had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What had started with Sunshine Café and Homestead Restaurant now included 15 local eateries, from casual diners to higher-end establishments. Each displayed a simple plaque in their window, a small American flag beside a knife and fork, signifying their participation. Veterans in need could present a special card, designed to look like an exclusive membership rather than charity, and receive a meal at no cost. The program operated on a mixed funding model that Gregory and his fellow Marines had carefully crafted. Participating restaurants covered a portion of the costs, community donations filled another portion, and a grant from a national veterans organization handled the rest. Everything was transparent, with monthly reports showing exactly how many veterans were being served and where the money was going. Melissa's living room had become unofficial headquarters, with a folding table covered in paperwork and a large calendar on the wall tracking restaurant rotations and special events. What had begun as a few hours a week had grown considerably, but she found she didn't mind. The work filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't known she was missing. On this particular Friday evening, Melissa was sorting through applications from 3 new restaurants wanting to join the program when her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Gregory standing there, still in his Marine uniform but with his hat tucked under his arm. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," he said with an apologetic smile. "I was hoping to catch you before the meeting tomorrow." "No problem," Melissa replied, stepping back to let him in. "I was just going through the new applications. We're up to 18 restaurants if these all work out." Gregory whistled low. "That's impressive. We were hoping for 10 by Christmas." "People want to help when you make it easy for them," Melissa said, clearing papers from her couch so they could sit. "Coffee?" "No thanks. I can't stay long. I actually came to tell you something before you heard it elsewhere." Gregory's expression grew more serious. "My unit is being deployed. We leave in 3 weeks." The news hit Melissa with unexpected force. Over the past months, she'd worked closely with Gregory and his 3 friends, coming to rely on their support and dedication to the program. More than that, she'd come to value Gregory's friendship, his steady presence, his unwavering belief in the project even when obstacles arose. "How long?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. 9 months minimum." Gregory ran a hand through his short hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his concern. "Possibly up to a year." Melissa nodded slowly, processing what this meant for the program, and trying not to think about what it meant personally. "Have you told your grandfather yet?" "Just came from there," Gregory confirmed. "He took it well, better than I expected. Said he's had plenty of practice at watching family members deploy. He's a strong man, Melissa agreed. One of the strongest I know. A brief silence fell between them, comfortable yet tinged with something unspoken. The program will be fine, Melissa said finally, answering the question Gregory hadn't asked. We've got good systems in place now, good people involved. Patricia has offered to help with the administrative side if I need it. I know it will be fine, Gregory said, his confidence genuine. That's not what I'm worried about. Then what? Gregory shifted slightly, looking more uncomfortable than she'd ever seen him, even during the tense confrontation at the cafe. My grandfather. He's been doing better since all this started. More social, more engaged. But I worry about him being alone while I'm gone. He won't be alone, Melissa assured him. He's at Homestead 3 times a week for lunch. The Veterans Coffee Group meets at Sunshine every Tuesday morning. He's more connected now than he's been in years. I know, and I'm grateful for that. Gregory hesitated, then forged ahead. But would you keep a special eye on him? He likes you, respects you. He might tell you things he wouldn't tell others. Of course I will, Melissa promised without hesitation. He's special to me too, you know. Gregory's relief was visible. Thank you. That means a lot. He stood, clearly preparing to leave, then paused. There's something else I've been meaning to ask you. What's that? When I get back, would you consider having dinner with me? Not a program meeting, not at my grandfather's house. Just dinner. The question caught Melissa by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There had been moments over the past months. A lingering glance. A touch that lasted just a beat longer than necessary. Conversations that flowed so easily they lost track of time. But she'd attributed it to their shared commitment to the program. I'd like that, she said simply. Gregory's smile lit up his face. Good, that's good. Something to look forward to then. After he left, Melissa sat for a long time thinking about how much her life had changed since that rainy afternoon when Mr. Wilson had counted out his coins at the cafe. One small act of kindness had set in motion events she never could have predicted, leading her here, to new work that fulfilled her, to a community project that mattered, and now possibly to something more with Gregory. The next 3 weeks passed quickly. The 4 Marines spent every spare moment ensuring the program was solidly established before their deployment. They trained additional volunteers, documented procedures, and held a community fundraiser that raised enough money to cover program costs for 6 months. The night before their deployment, a special dinner was held at Homestead Restaurant. Veterans from across the community came to wish them well, sharing stories of their own deployments and offering words of encouragement. Mr. Wilson sat at the head table, his chest puffed with pride as he watched his grandson address the gathering. We may be leaving, Gregory told the assembled crowd, but the work continues. The Meals with Honor program is bigger than any one of us. It's about community, respect, and making sure no veteran ever has to choose between dignity and a warm meal. He paused, his eyes finding Melissa where she stood near the kitchen door, and we're leaving it in the very best hands. Early the next morning, a small group gathered at the bus station to see the Marines off. Melissa stood beside Mr. Wilson, who maintained a stoic expression despite the emotion evident in his eyes. As the bus prepared to depart, Gregory stepped away from his friends for a final word with his grandfather. You'll write? The old man asked, his voice gruff. Every week, Gregory promised, embracing him, and I expect full reports on how the program is doing. You'll get them, Mr. Wilson assured him. Now go do your job and don't worry about things here. We've got it handled. Gregory turned to Melissa next. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. Just come back safe, she replied. We'll be waiting. As the bus pulled away, Mr. Wilson placed a weathered hand on Melissa's shoulder. He'll be fine, he said, as much to reassure himself as her. Wilson men are hard to keep down. I believe it, Melissa smiled. Now how about some breakfast? I hear Sunshine Café has a good veterans discount. The months that followed established a new rhythm. Melissa balanced her work at the restaurant with her growing responsibilities for the program. Mr. Wilson became her right hand, his military precision perfect for keeping track of the participating restaurants and their schedules. Together they expanded the program to include holiday meal deliveries to homebound veterans and a monthly community dinner that brought together veterans of all ages to share stories and forge connections. Letters arrived regularly from Gregory and his friends, full of news they could share and vague references to things they couldn't. Melissa kept them updated on the program's progress, including photographs of new participating restaurants and special events. To Mr. Wilson, she left the more personal family news, respecting the special bond between grandfather and grandson. Winter settled over Riverdale, bringing early snowfalls and holiday decorations throughout the town. The Meals with Honor program hosted a special Christmas dinner at the community center, serving over 100 veterans and their families. Reynolds, the cafe manager who had once fired Melissa, now volunteered regularly and had become one of the program's most dedicated supporters. "Funny how things work out," he commented to Melissa as they served dessert to the assembled guests. "If I hadn't made that terrible decision, none of this would exist." "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes," Melissa replied. "But let's not test that theory again, okay?" Reynolds laughed. "Deal." As January turned to February and February to March, the Meals with Honor program continued to flourish. Gregory's letters indicated his deployment might end earlier than expected, perhaps by summer instead of fall. "He sounds eager to get home," Mr. Wilson observed one afternoon as he and Melissa reviewed the program's quarterly numbers at his kitchen table. "I imagine everyone in his unit is," Melissa replied, keeping her tone neutral, despite the flutter of anticipation she felt at the thought of Gregory's return. Mr. Wilson fixed her with a knowing look. "He asks about you in every letter, you know. Not just about the program, about you." Melissa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure he asks about lots of people. Not the way he asks about you," the old man said with certainty. "I may be old, but I'm not blind. I see the way you light up when his letters arrive." Before Melissa could formulate a response, Mr. Wilson continued, his voice softening. "Beth, my wife, she used to look at me that way back when I was deployed. Like getting my letters was better than Christmas morning." "You must miss her very much," Melissa said gently. "Every day." He nodded. "But it helps seeing bits of her and Gregory, and seeing him find someone who makes him want to come home even more." In late spring, as flowers began pushing through the soil and trees budded with new life, word came that Gregory's unit would return in June. The town immediately began planning a welcome home celebration, with the Meals with Honor program at the center of the arrangements. The morning of their return dawned clear and bright. Riverdale's Main Street was decorated with flags and banners, and a crowd gathered at the community center where the Marines would arrive after processing through their base. Mr. Wilson, dressed in his best suit with his service medals proudly displayed, stood beside Melissa, both watching the road anxiously. When the bus finally appeared, a cheer went up from the crowd. As the 4 Marines stepped off, resplendent in their dress uniforms, the applause swelled. Gregory's eyes scanned the crowd, finding his grandfather first, then settling on Melissa with a smile that made the months of waiting worthwhile. The official welcome ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with the mayor presenting the Marines with keys to the city and acknowledging their contribution to the community through the Meals with Honor program. Gregory, speaking for the group, thanked everyone for their support both of the program and of their military service. "Being away from home is one of the hardest parts of serving," he told the crowd. "But knowing that our community was taking care of its own while we were gone, that made it easier. Knowing that the work we started continued to grow and thrive. That's the best homecoming gift we could as